How vulnerable are the industries we rely on to a changing climate?
Hmm. It's a question we all need to be asking ourselves.
Yeah. And on today's FBS podcast, we're going to explore that very question by taking a deep dive into a report about how shifting seasons are impacting the forest products supply chain in Vermont.
It's a fascinating case study
You
with
know,
implications that reach far beyond one state or industry.
exactly. And that's why we're focusing on this report as part of the FBS podcast's mission to bring practical information to mid-career professionals like you. The insights here can be valuable whether you're in forestry or finance, manufacturing, or marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. The report analyzes 5 decades of climate data, going all the way back to 1970.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is, and what it reveals is a pretty compelling story of how even subtle shifts in temperature and precipitation can have cascading effects on an entire industry.
Okay, so let's break it down starting with winter. We tend to think of Vermont winters as reliably cold, but the report shows that average winter temperatures have risen by more than 4 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1980s.
That may not sound like much,
No, not at first.
but it has big implications for the ground. When you think about traditional logging practices, they really depend on the ground being frozen solid to support heavy equipment.
Yeah, of course.
But with shorter periods of frozen ground, the industry is facing a shrinking window for timber harvesting.
So it's not just about warmer temperatures, right? The report also highlights a shift in precipitation patterns.
Precisely. We're seeing a trend towards more rain and less snow, particularly in December and February.
Oh, interesting.
And that has a compounding effect because, snow acts as insulation, protecting the ground and extending the logging season. But when rain falls on snow, it creates icy conditions and further reduces the snowpack, making it even more challenging to operate.
So we have warmer winters and less reliable snow cover. What happens when that snow melts and spring arrives?
Well, it brings on what Vermonters call mud season when the ground thaws and becomes saturated.
Ah, I see.
And the report found that mud season is becoming longer due to earlier snowmelt and increased rainfall in March and April. This creates logistical headaches for loggers trying to access timber and transport it out of the forest.
It seems like these shifting seasons are putting a real squeeze on the traditional logging calendar.
Absolutely, and the challenges continue into summer. While summer is typically a time to catch up, the report indicates that even this season is becoming more unpredictable. Specifically, there's been a significant increase in rainfall during June, which can lead to soil erosion, disrupt logging schedules, and make it harder to maintain those crucial logging roads.
So even when the ground is dry enough to work, there's a risk of sudden downpours that can bring everything to a halt.
Exactly, and then as if a shortened winter, an extended mud season, and unpredictable summer rains weren't enough, fall is also presenting its own set of challenges.
Really? Isn't fall supposed to be a time for crisp air and colorful foliage? What's happening there?
Well, you still get the foliage. But the report reveals a trend of increased rainfall in October, coupled with warmer temperatures. This is essentially creating a second mud season before winter even arrives.
So it seems like the industry is facing challenges in every season. That's a pretty stark picture of how even seemingly small climate shifts can have ripple effects throughout an entire industry.
Yeah, and it underscores the need for adaptation and innovation. That's what makes this report so fascinating. It doesn't just document the problems, it also highlights how the forest products industry in Vermont is responding to these challenges. They're not standing still, that's for sure. Let's delve into some of the key adaptations they've been making.
Okay, so if I'm a logger facing these unpredictable conditions, where do I even begin?
Well, the report points to infrastructure,
Okay.
specifically road systems, as a critical first line of defense.
Makes sense. If you can't reliably access the logging areas, nothing else really matters.
Exactly, and it's not just about patching potholes.
Yep.
The industry is investing in upgrading logging roads with more resilient design.
What makes them more resilient?
Well, for example, they're using a gravel grid system that allows water to drain quickly, preventing erosion and maintaining accessibility even during those heavy downpours we talked about. They're also using higher quality materials and more robust engineering to withstand the increased freeze-thaw cycles that can damage roads.
So they're essentially rethinking the entire road system with climate change in mind.
Precisely.
Huh.
And it's a smart investment because these roads aren't just used for logging. They provide access for recreation, firefighting, and other essential activities in forested areas.
Okay, so we've got more resilient roads. What about the actual logging process? Has that changed as well?
Yeah, the report highlights some interesting innovations in logging techniques. One example is a shift towards whole tree and cut-to-length harvesting.
Can you explain how those methods are different from traditional logging?
Sure, traditional logging involves felling trees, limbing them on site, and then hauling the logs out. This can be very disruptive to the forest floor, especially in wet conditions.
Yeah.
Whole tree harvesting, on the other hand, involved felling the entire tree and transporting it to a landing area for processing.
Interesting.
This minimizes ground disturbance and can be more efficient in wet conditions.
It seems counterintuitive to haul the entire tree out. Why is that more efficient?
Well, it reduces the amount of time heavy equipment needs to operate on sensitive ground. Plus, advancements in processing equipment mean that handling those whole trees at the landing is actually quite efficient.
Okay, so you're basically moving the workshop to a more controlled environment. What about cut-to-length harvesting?
Cut to length takes this concept a step further. Specialized equipment is used to fell, delimb, and cut the tree to length right there in the forest. This reduces the amount of material that needs to be transported and can be done efficiently with smaller crews, minimizing the overall impact on the forest.
So both of these techniques are not only more adaptable to changing weather conditions, but also have potential environmental benefits.
Yes, exactly. And this ties into a broader trend we're seeing in forestry and other industries, a growing recognition that sustainability and economic viability go hand in hand.
It's not just about adapting to climate change. It's about doing so in a way that protects the resource for the long term.
Absolutely. And the report highlights another key adaptation that is often overlooked. The human element. Behavioral changes like flexible scheduling and segmented harvesting are proving crucial.
So instead of sticking to a rigid schedule, loggers are having to be more nimble and responsive to the changing conditions.
Exactly. It might involve delaying a harvest by a few days to let the ground dry out, or breaking down a large harvest into smaller, more manageable segments that can be completed when conditions are favorable.
It seems like this requires a lot of coordination between loggers, landowners, and mills.
It does, and that's another key takeaway from the report, the importance of communication and collaboration throughout the supply chain. Everyone needs to be on the same page and willing to adjust their plans as needed.
It's interesting how these challenges are forcing the industry to become more interconnected and collaborative. It's more than just upgrading equipment or changing techniques. It's also about adapting how you work with others.
That's a great point. And this leads to another crucial aspect highlighted in the report, the need for continuous learning and knowledge sharing.
You mean staying up to date on the latest research and best practices for adapting to climate change?
Precisely. The climate is constantly changing, so the way we manage our forests needs to evolve as well. Organizations like FBS play a critical role here, providing mid-career professionals with the information and resources they need to make informed decisions.
It's about empowering people with the knowledge to navigate a changing landscape.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial point. The insights from this report, while focused on Vermont's forest products industry, have much broader implications.
In what way?
Well, think about it. What we're seeing here is a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities that many industries are facing in a changing climate. Whether you're in agriculture, energy, or even urban planning, the need to adapt to shifting weather patterns and resource availability is becoming increasingly critical.
It's a powerful reminder that what's happening in one industry can offer valuable lessons for others.
You got it. And what stands out to me from the report is how it highlights the interconnected nature of these challenges. It's not just about dealing with one specific issue like more rainfall or warmer winters. It's about understanding how all these factors interact and influence each other.
Yeah, and recognizing that adaptation isn't a one-time fix, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. The climate will continue to change, so, industries will need to constantly assess their vulnerabilities and experiment with new approaches and adjust their strategies accordingly.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
What gives you hope that industries can successfully make these kinds of adaptations?
Well, I'm encouraged by the level of innovation and resilience we're already seeing. The forestry industry in Vermont is a great example. They're not just reacting to problems, they're proactively seeking solutions.
Wow.
They're investing in research, and they're collaborating with each other to find the best ways to adapt.
It's like they're turning these challenges into opportunities to become more efficient, more sustainable, and ultimately more competitive.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway for our listeners, regardless of their industry. The companies and organizations that embrace this mindset of adaptability and innovation will be the ones that thrive in the long term.
So rather than viewing climate change as just a threat, we can also see it as a catalyst for positive change.
Absolutely. It's a chance to rethink old assumptions and challenge the status quo and create a more resilient and sustainable future.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. We've seen how seemingly small shifts in climate can have a big impact on an industry. But we've also seen how that industry is responding with remarkable ingenuity and resilience.
And I think the key takeaway here is that adaptation is essential, not just for industries, but for all of us. As the climate continues to change, we all need to be thinking about how we can adjust our practices, our businesses, and even our lifestyles to create a more sustainable future.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for another insightful deep dive on the FBS podcast. We hope this information helps our mid-career listeners navigate the challenges and opportunities of a changing world.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.